So, here's something that was never supposed to reach the surface. On a Tuesday afternoon, a photographer sitting in a rented speedboat off the southern French coast got lucky in the worst possible way. A handheld lens, a long lens, the kind of equipment that doesn't apologize for what it captures, framed a woman most of Britain had been trained to imagine in muted pearls and country coats, in a frame nobody had prepared for. Camilla, Queen Consort, aboard a chartered super yacht, son on her shoulders, hand resting on the arm of a friend whose name would later dominate every broadcast. And behind her, half turned toward the deck, a silhouette that would set off the most consequential 10 days the monarchy had walked through since the days after the Queen died. The images were sharp. They were unkind. They were everywhere within 9 hours. And from that moment, nothing inside that family behaved the way it had been behaving for years. If you follow this channel and you are not yet subscribed, take a second and do that now, because what I am about to walk you through is the kind of story that rearranges how you read everything you thought you already understood about this family. The yacht pictures were the trigger. What they exposed was something far older, far quieter, and far more dangerous than a photograph has any right to be. Now, let's start at the moment the photographs surfaced, because the way the story broke tells you almost everything you need to know about the palace that was about to be tested. They landed at 6:14 in the morning, London time, on the desk of a picture editor at one of the national tabloids, and within 40 minutes, 3 other newsrooms had them. The picture desk at the tabloid held them for 2 hours, which in that world is an eternity, while lawyers argued about what could legally be published and what could only be reported. They were not classified as private. The yacht had been moored in international waters when most of the images were taken. The subjects, with the exception of one minor royal child in the background of a single frame, were not minors. The legal arguments, in other words, collapsed. And by 8:30 in the morning, the front pages had been redrawn before they went to press. This matters because it tells you the palace did not get the soft landing its strongest allies had spent 2 years trying to engineer around Camilla. There was no gradual leak. There was no controlled release. There was a flood. And the monarchy, which has survived every kind of crisis except the kind that arrives before breakfast, was caught exactly where it did not want to be, on the wrong side of a clock. Inside Kensington Palace, the phones began ringing at 8:47. William's principal private secretary took the first call, a courtesy heads-up from one of the picture editors who explained that his publication had chosen restraint and would not lead with the images, but would report their existence and would not be the only outlet making that choice. The second call came from Clarence House, and the voice on the other end was not Camilla's. It was Camilla's most senior aide, and the request was simple and urgent in a way that simple requests rarely are inside palace walls. Camilla wanted to know whether William would accept a private phone call before the day was out. The secretary asked the aide to hold. He walked to the small office William was using that morning, knocked once, entered, and closed the door behind him. And what happened in that room in the 4 minutes that followed would determine the shape of the next 10 days. William did not ask to see the photographs. He asked one question, the question that matters most when news like this lands inside a working monarchy. He asked whether the children were in any of the images. He was told they were not. He nodded. He asked a second question, which was colder and considerably more important. He asked whether Charles had seen them yet. The secretary said Clarence House had informed the king at 7:55 that morning that Charles had already spoken with his private office, that no public statement had yet been issued, and that the palace was being given the morning to respond before any further detail was published. William said nothing for a moment. Then he gave his instructions, and they were not what his secretary had expected. He did not say defend Camilla. He did not say protect her. He did not say stand down. He said that whatever response the office constructed, it would have to be honest. And the word honest, when spoken inside those walls without softening,
without the polite cushions the palace usually wraps around its own internal language, meant something very specific. It meant that for the first time in years, the institution was not going to lead with the marriage. It was going to lead with the facts. And the facts, as the morning unfolded, were stubborn. The photographs showed Camilla aboard a yacht she had publicly claimed she had no intention of taking during this part of the summer.
The yacht belonged to a family whose commercial interests had been quietly but repeatedly flagged inside palace advisory briefings for nearly 2 years. The trip had not been registered in the official schedule because official schedule, which is the formal record of royal movements managed by the master of the household, the senior official responsible for the operational life of the royal palaces, was only ever required for engagements carried out in a public capacity. A private holiday did not require registration, but a private holiday taken during a period in which Camilla had publicly withdrawn from 2 scheduled engagements on the grounds of an unspecified prior commitment, that was different. That was the shape of the problem. Because the public had been told one thing, and the photographs showed another. And the gap between those 2 truths was where the monarchy was about to be wounded. By midday, the broadcast networks had the story. Not the photographs themselves, those would not appear on the evening news for legal reasons too tedious to dwell on, but enough detail to send the country into a kind of stunned, low-grade panic that royal stories produce when the public is not yet sure what it is looking at. Presenters spoke of a private trip, of yacht photographs, of questions raised about registry and disclosure. And inside that careful, deliberately incomplete reporting, the public did what it always does when it receives a royal story in pieces. It assembled its own. The first reading, the one that dominated the morning broadcasts, was sympathetic. A private holiday, a working woman deserving of rest. The press had no right to her time off. This was the reading Camilla's allies had spent 4 years preparing the country for, and for 2 hours, it held. The second reading began at lunchtime, when a single political columnist, writing from the opposition benches, suggested publicly that the trip had not been disclosed because disclosure would have revealed the identity of one of the guests aboard. And from that moment, the conversation stopped being about a holiday and started being about a choice. Now, that choice had a name and a face that almost nobody could place, which made it perfect for the new cycle that was about to begin. The guest was not a member of the royal household. She was not a working figure in any official sense. She was a personal friend of Camilla's, a woman from her pre-marriage life, someone the public had very little memory of and very little reason to remember. And yet her presence aboard that yacht was the unspoken center of the photograph itself, because she was the reason for it, in the plainest possible sense. She had been recovering from illness. Camilla had wanted to see her. The yacht was the private setting that made that possible without intrusion. None of that was criminal. None of that was even remotely improper. And yet it placed the queen consort in the middle of a story the palace could not easily absorb, because the woman's family, the family that owned the yacht, had commercial interests before the crown, before parliament, before a series of still pending regulatory decisions in 2 different departments of government. This was a conflict, not in the moral sense, but in the constitutional sense. And constitutional conflicts inside the monarchy are not the sort of thing the public can be expected to feel generously about when the photographs looked the way these photographs looked. A regency is when a sovereign delegates the duties of the crown to another senior member of the royal family because of incapacity or absence. A conflict of interest is when a public figure's private associations could plausibly be seen to influence a public decision. And what the photographs exposed, without anyone having to say so out loud, was the second of those 2 things perched quietly next to the crown. That mattered, and the palace understood it almost at once. At Kensington Palace, Catherine had been awake since 6. She had read the morning headlines on her own phone, in her own sitting room, before anyone in the household mentioned them.
And that detail matters, because Catherine has learned across years of royal life to read a story before the household has decided how to read it for her. She sat with the photographs for several minutes. She closed the browser. She went downstairs. She poured tea for William before he came out. She did not raise the subject. She did not have to. There are marriages inside that family in which the first thing one partner says in a crisis is the wrong thing. And there are marriages inside that family in which nothing has to be said at all, because the household itself is the conversation. William's is the second kind. Catherine understood the morning's shape before any briefing reached her, and she chose not to add a single unnecessary sentence to it. That restraint, quietly understood by everyone who watched her move through that week, became one of the reasons the country did not lose its nerve. Inside Clarence's house, a smaller crisis had already begun. Camilla had returned from the south of France overnight and had been at the residence since dawn. She had known the photographs were coming, because she had been warned by the same channels that always warn her, somewhere between 24 and 36 hours in advance.
She had not warned Charles. This was explained to a small number of advisors as a tactical decision. The choice to give the king the morning to absorb the photographs as published, rather than receiving them secondhand from his wife. Whether that explanation held up under pressure was a question that, for the moment, no one was prepared to ask out loud. Camilla was in the small drawing room she used for private meetings and difficult mornings. She was on the phone with her personal assistant, going through options, and there were not many. There was a statement of regret for the lack of disclosure. There was a statement of reassurance about the absence of any conflict. There was the option of refusing to comment publicly and trusting the monarchy to absorb the wave as it had absorbed so many others. And there was the option she did not want to consider, and yet could not stop considering, which was silence. True silence. Not the strategic silence the palace uses when it has decided what to say and is waiting for the right moment. The silence of a woman who has realized that whatever she says next will be the wrong thing in somebody's eyes, and so has chosen to protect herself by refusing to contribute to a conversation that has already decided what it thinks of her. And that is the moment I want you to really hold on to, because the next 24 hours would test whether the monarchy was capable of treating Camilla as a person with the right to fall back, or whether it would treat her as a liability to be managed. The answer, when it came, was not reassuring. By the early afternoon, Sir Oliver Hindmarsh, William's most senior constitutional advisor, had been summoned. Sir Oliver is a quiet man, soft-spoken at briefings, sharp-edged in private counsel, and he had spent nearly 3 decades guiding the crown through exactly the kinds of decisions that look small on paper and enormous in their human consequences. He arrived at Kensington Palace at 2:15. He read through the legal summary, the security assessment, the calendar of engagements Camilla had withdrawn from, the timeline of disclosures, the photographs. He asked 11 questions. He was given 11 answers. He asked one more question, which was not on his list, and which was the only one that mattered. He asked whether William intended to speak directly to Camilla, and he asked it gently, the way a man asks when he knows the answer will influence every piece of advice that follows. He was told that William had not yet decided, but that the decision would be made before the day ended. By 4 p.m, William had made 2 calls. The first was to the master of the household, the senior official responsible for the operational life of the royal palaces, who had the power to amend the official schedule and to write into it a private corrective that would matter later. The instruction was brief. The official schedule would be updated to reflect the full picture of Camilla's movements during the disputed week, including the previously undisclosed period. There would be no concealment. There would be no language that softened the absence. The schedule was the official record, and the official record would tell the truth. The second call was to his father, and those who know the rhythm of these two men, the way conversations between them have bent and softened and broken over the years, say that this call was different from any of them. William did not ask Charles for permission. William did not ask Charles for advice. William told Charles what would happen next, with a courtesy that did not soften the firmness, and Charles listened. He listened for several minutes. He did not interrupt. And when he spoke, what he said was a single sentence. He said, "Do what the institution needs. Not what I need, not what she needs. The institution." And there was, in those who heard it secondhand, the distinct sense that Charles had been waiting for someone to say that sentence for a very long time, and that the relief of hearing his son say it now was not small. And what came next, in the days that followed, did not resemble anything the palace had done in living memory. On the second morning, William issued a written instruction, signed by him personally rather than issued through the press office, in which he made two things clear. The first was that Camilla would continue in her role, but with a defined limitation. She would not, for the foreseeable future, undertake any engagement connected to the commercial interests of the family whose yacht she had traveled on, nor any engagement involving the relevant regulatory departments until the conflict could be formally cleared. This was not a stripping of the title. This was not a curtailing of her authority. It was, in the language of the Constitution, a recusal, which meant a formal step back from a specific category of duty to remove even the appearance of improper influence. Recusal is the word that constitutional lawyers use when a public figure chooses to remove themselves from a decision because of a personal connection that could be questioned. It is not a punishment, it is a protection of the institution and of the person, and William had chosen to use the milder word deliberately, because he understood what the harsher one would do to his father. The second thing the instruction made clear was procedural. The master of the household would conduct a formal review of disclosure practices across all working members of the family. Private travel that intersected with active public engagements would be logged. Private meetings that touched on scheduled commitments would be noted. And the gap between what was public and what was private, a gap that had been left deliberately wide for decades inside the palace, would be narrowed by policy, quietly, on paper, and then enforced. Now, let me take you back a moment, because the story cannot end with policy. There was a meeting that mattered more than any policy. On the third evening, William went to Clarence's house. He did not use the formal entrance. He arrived through the small courtyard gate, alone, without an aide. He was shown to the same drawing room where Camilla had spent most of the prior day, and he sat down across from her. What was said in that room has, of course, not been disclosed, and will not be. But those close to both households describe what was visible from the outside as an exchange of roughly 40 minutes, conducted in low voices, with long pauses, and without visible anger. They say William did not raise his voice. They say Camilla did not weep. They say that neither of them tried to make the other feel guilty, and that neither of them tried to make the other feel absolved. And they say that when the meeting ended, Camilla walked William to the courtyard gate herself, which she had not done for any visitor in years, and which carried, for those who saw it, the unmistakable weight of a woman thanking a man for not pretending the world was different from what it was. The country, meanwhile, was not waiting for private meetings to end before it formed its view. The morning papers on the third day had been sharper, the broadcasts more pointed,
The commentators, the professional class of royal watchers who fill the hours between one event and the next, had begun the slow, deliberate shift from sympathy to skepticism that always signals the entry of the political class into a royal story. A former minister, interviewed at mid-morning, suggested in measured language that the photographs raised legitimate questions about disclosure. A serving MP, asked on a political program about the same photographs, declined to comment publicly, but smiled in a way that was widely interpreted. And within 24 hours, the palace had what every crisis manager fears more than outrage, which is indifference.
The story had stopped being about Camilla. Briefly, fully, completely. It had become a story about the monarchy's competence, and once a royal crisis turns that corner, the surgery required to repair it is significantly more invasive. By the end of the week, Camilla had made one public appearance, carefully chosen, carefully managed, a small visit to a community garden project in the Midlands. No cameras inside, only one photograph released, and even that photograph had been vetted in advance. She wore a soft gray coat. She smiled the way she has learned to smile across 8 years of public life, a smile that has become so practiced it sometimes looks more like a posture than an emotion. She said nothing about the photographs. She was not asked. The protocol around her had thickened, and she understood it. There were fewer aides at her shoulder than usual. There was a slightly longer pause before she was introduced. There was a quietness to the day that those who saw her described, faintly, as a kind of courtesy the public often performs when it is trying to decide whether to forgive. And here is the moment in the story where the word that the public began to reach for came into focus. Not eviction, not stripping. The word that began quietly circulating by the end of the week was containment. Camilla was still the queen consort. Her title had not been touched. Her portrait still hung in the staterooms of every royal residence in which it had hung the week before. But the radius of her official life had been drawn smaller, deliberately, formally. And the public understood the meaning of that, even when the press was told not to use the language. And what made the containment bearable, what made it possible for the monarchy to absorb without breaking, was something William did publicly 2 days later. He appeared at a national event in his capacity as heir to the throne, and he made a speech. Short, prepared, 8 minutes long, and entirely about the future of the institution, rather than the events of the week. He spoke about continuity. He spoke about service. He spoke about the responsibility that comes with preparing for a role you do not yet hold. And he did not mention Camilla once. He did not mention the photographs once. He did not mention his father once. He spoke instead, in the careful language of an institution that has been speaking in careful language for 1,000 years, about an institution that endures because its people, all of its people, accept that there are moments the public does not see, and that the moments the public does see are the ones that must be protected at all costs. And when he finished, the country did something it does not often do for a royal speech. It was quiet. Not the reverent silence of a ceremony, not the polite silence of a broadcast audience. The genuine quiet of a country that had, for a moment, heard the institution speak about itself in the only language that ever managed to hold it together, honest, restrained, and looking forward. By the second week, the crisis had passed its sharpest edge. The constitutional review into disclosure practices, quietly commissioned by the master of the household, was underway. The recusal on Camilla's engagements had been observed without incident. The relevant regulatory departments had been formally notified that the queen consort would not be involved in decisions touching the family whose hospitality she had accepted, and the notification carried the same weight as any other internal palace communication, which is to say, it was understood immediately and never questioned. Charles made no public statement. He did not need to. Theirs is a long marriage, weathered by far harder seasons than this one. And both of them understood that what the institution needed in that moment was not a husband's protest, but a king's calm. Yet, there is another figure in this story whose silence did more work than most of the language that surrounded it. And that figure is Tom Parker Bowles. He was not aboard the yacht. He was never aboard the yacht. He was, however, the person Camilla telephoned at 4 in the morning, the day before the photographs surfaced, when the warning had arrived through the same familiar channels. And the call had been brief, the way calls between a mother and her son become brief when both of them know that what is coming cannot be softened. Tom had not had time to do anything. Tom had not been asked to do anything. Tom, like so many people on the edges of this story, had simply been present in the family in the precise hour the family had to absorb the blow. And he had stayed out of the public view with a discipline that was, by the end of the week, widely noted and never publicly thanked. The photographs themselves never did appear on the evening news in their full form. The legal arguments that had been settled in the morning continued to settle quietly across the week, and by the time the journalists who had them were ready to publish, the country had already moved its attention to the next thing, and the publication would have produced only what the trade calls diminishing returns, meaning less public reaction with each passing day. Yet, here is what is most worth holding on to, even now, weeks later. The yacht, the photographs, the recusal, the speech, the meeting that lasted 40 minutes in a small drawing room. None of these are the actual story. They are the shape the story took because the institution required it. The actual story is the same story the monarchy has been telling itself for years, with each private crisis confirming what the public already knows but is rarely asked to face directly. Power inside a royal family is not concentrated in the person who holds the throne. It is concentrated in the person who is being prepared to hold it. William has known this for a long time. The country has not always known it. But the country learned it during the week those photographs surfaced. And what it learned was that the institutional kind of power exercised in private, with restraint, with firmness, with a look forward rather than a retaliation backward, is the only kind of power that does not eventually destroy the institution that carries it. And that, I think, is the part the public will find hardest to accept. Because the public loves a villain, and the public loves a fall, and the public loves the simple story of a man kicking a woman out of his family. The actual story is more uncomfortable than that. It is the story of a man drawing a circle around the institution he will one day lead, including the people who have wounded it, because his job is not to repair the past. His job is to inherit it. There is a sentence William used in that speech that I keep coming back to. He said that the monarchy's strength has always rested on its willingness to be examined by itself before it is examined by anyone else. That is an extraordinary sentence. It is also a sentence that can only be spoken by someone who has accepted that the family he loves will always be more public than it is private, and that the only dignity available to it in the long run is the dignity of being honest about its own limits. So, where does this leave us? Camilla continues in her role. She has said very little publicly, and what she has said has been careful and dignified and a little sad. The recusal stands. The disclosure review continues. The master of the household has indicated, through the usual channels, that the reforms will be folded into the standing operating procedure of the household within the next quarter, which means that what William chose to do in private will, eventually, become the official water in which the next generation of working royals swims.
The photographs are not gone. They are not forgotten. They are simply absorbed into the long, complicated story of a family that has been absorbing its own difficulties for centuries.
And the silence between William and Camilla since that afternoon in the drawing room has been described, by those who see it, as the silence of two people who understood each other more completely than either of them wished to. She lives in the institution she helped hold together for years. He is the institution's next keeper. They both know what that means. And neither of them, for the moment, has a story to tell about it that the country would receive fairly. So they wait. And the monarchy continues. And the truth of what happened, the deeper truth, the one the photographs themselves did not quite capture, is that the monarchy chose honesty over protection, and continuity over comfort, and a working relationship over a dramatic ending. And that, in the long history of this family, is the choice that has always held it together. Thank you for watching. Please do not forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.